Woman of Reddit, what is your "I am the client not my husband stop ignoring me" story? Wasn't my husband, not even my boyfriend, but a guy friend I happened to have round when a joiner came to fix something in my home. I welcomed the joiner in, started talking to him about the issue, then he saw my friend and did a 180-degree to talk to him. He literally turned his back on me while I was mid-sentence. In my home. I hope you flipped out. My scenario doesn't quite fit the bill, but I'm a female business owner with a male business partner. I've had a few customers born in the dark ages and reps that asked to speak to my boss, but the worst was a guy who snapped his fingers and told me to put the kettle on girly. Needless to say, he didn't get his cuppa and he certainly didn't get the discount he asked for. I'm a guy, but if I saw something like that, I'd tack on an butthole tax as a line item. When I was a baby, for some reason I wouldn't latch on when my mother breastfed me, so I wasn't eating well. The doctor completely ignored my mom and only talked to my dad because she was too hysterical. He was on the verge of finding out what that looked like. I took my colleague out to lunch. He wasn't a subordinate, he was at the same level. However, I was given a company card and he wasn't, due to the nature of our jobs. When the bill came around, the waitress gave it to him because she assumed he would be paying. He graciously grabbed the bill and gave it to me and said she's the boss. Smart move. Made me feel validated, and he got a free lunch. I love this colleague for doing this. I've been on the flip side of this. For years, I worked at bicycle shops and regularly sold some pretty expensive bikes. One day, a couple came in. The wife was interested in a bike, and it quickly became apparent that the husband was an overpowering, dominating type. She wants to do this. She doesn't want to do that. She likes this. She doesn't like that, etc. When it became clear she wasn't being allowed to do much speaking at all, I would let the husband ask the question, and I'd reply by physically turning and giving the answer to the wife, making eye contact with her only and pointedly ignoring the husband. It was pretty blatant. She loved it. She lit up, engaged with me, and genuinely seemed to enjoy the process of learning more about riding and getting into a new sport hobby. It's not so much a particular story, but when I was shopping for a car several years ago, the salesman at every dealership kept talking to my husband instead of me, even though I was the one who contacted the dealerships and made sure to introduce myself first. My husband got sick of it and started telling them, "Don't talk to me. It's not my car. Talk to her." I wound up buying from a saleswoman who treated us equally until she pretty quickly figured out my husband was not involved whatsoever in the decision. As a sales manager in the car industry, that is one of the first things I teach my reps. Talk to both people. At work, I manage a few facility systems in our building. Think air handlers, water purification, etc. I was meeting a new vendor, let's call him Pat, that was servicing one of the systems I was overseeing. Pat had already met the facilities engineer, also a man, so this co-worker was introducing me to him. Instead of talking directly to me, Pat turned to my co-worker after shaking my hand and asked him, "And what does she do here?" A few weeks later, he had the unpleasant opportunity to learn that I'm the one who calls him when his company falls through and doesn't deliver. Needless to say, I was not overly polite about it when Pat failed to do his job. Happened to my mom when we went to look at colleges. The admissions guy opened by shaking my dad's hand, constantly directed questions at my dad, and would look to him for confirmation whenever my mom said something. My mom is de facto the money person of our family unit. She manages the family finances and investments and stuff, and was way more qualified to comment on things like student loans or expected contribution. When we left that meeting, she was absolutely furious that she had to basically fight the admissions person to have a normal conversation. I am the money person in our relationship, and this happens to me all the time. Every car we've bought, place we've rented, investment we've made, you name it. My husband is now very confident in telling the people that if they keep trying to talk to him about it, the only decision he will be able to make is telling them to get lost. My husband and I had our backyard completely dug up and re-landscaped when we bought our house. The landscaper was an older guy, probably around my dad's age, and my husband and I are pretty young to be homeowners. so I could kinda understand this dude's condescending attitude. When he came over the first time to do the estimate, he almost exclusively addressed my husband, even though I'd made it clear I was the one who was doing the designing and knew what I wanted done. When the work was done and I paid him, he kept looking behind me for my husband and almost didn't give me the aftercare instructions for the new sod, saying he wanted to make sure it was done right so he'd email them to my husband. I finally snapped, "Give me the dang piece of paper, Bruce. I'm the one who will be home during the day to do the dang thing." I worked nights at the time. He reluctantly handed it over and called my husband the next day to make sure the lawn got watered. My husband told him, "You'd have to ask her, Bruce. She told you she'd do the dang thing," and hung up. I had, indeed, done the dang thing. Shoulder told him to sod off. Not a client per se, but a relevant story. I, 38F, caught some hunters trespassing on my property. I wasn't rude to them at all, just waved from the other side of the field. The next day they show up at my house and one gestures towards the police car in the driveway and asks to speak to my husband about hunting in our woods. I was like, "You can talk to him if you want, but that's my cruiser and this is my land, not his." They still insisted on getting permission from my husband. We were looking into replacing our roof and found a metal roof company who was running a promotion, so I gave them a call and scheduled for someone to come out and give us a quote. I was able to answer all of his questions, but he refused to give me a quote without my husband present, with some sign before we leave for best price excuse, and was intent on driving back over the following day when my husband would be home. I called their main office shortly after he left and said I wasn't interested in any high pressure sales tactics. I just wanted a quote, and if they wouldn't give that to me, the one who would be paying for it, then to not bother coming back out. Didn't see them again. The 3 other roofing companies I contacted had no problem dealing solely with me. 25 years ago my husband and I are looking for our first house. He had just graduated and still had student debt. I had been practicing law and had $20,000 saved for the down payment. Real estate agent only spoke to husband, even if I asked the questions. In one house we went to look at the basement and the guy says, "You don't want to go there. It has spiders." I told my husband I wouldn't ever buy a house from him. Later the guy ran for office and I told everyone the story, including a woman that called me randomly to promote his candidacy. Turns out she was his mother. It's a small thing but indicative of his attitude toward the fairer sex. Was invited to a weekend away with a supplier to launch their new range. My husband went with, and on the order day the financial manager of the supplier came up to my husband and asked him what he thinks about the new range and what he is considering to buy. My husband replied very dryly that he is only the +1 and that he must speak to me, seeing that I am the one with the checkbook. I hope this doesn't get buried because it's my absolute favorite thing. My husband and I were buying a new mattress. It was a joint decision on the feel of it, but my decision for the price point, warranty etc, because I was paying for it. In other words, all the stuff we actually needed the salesperson for. Salesperson was a fine guy, old-fashioned, not overtly rude, but he was definitely talking to my husband more than to me, the one with the money to pay. I noticed, but I'm used to it. I was going to get my info and pay the man. Whatever. My husband, bless him, wandered away all floaty, like he'd never seen a furniture store before. Weird, but okay. Then he came back and said, "Hey, can I have some money? I'm going to go check out the insert dumb little decorative thing in the other part of the store." I was weirded out because I have never seen him care about a lamp enough to go examine it on his own, and also we don't do that. But yeah, I said, "Sure," and handed him some cash. The salesman immediately stopped paying attention to my husband. Suddenly, in his mind, I was wearing all the pants. He started asking me what I did for a living, etc, and I was able to negotiate for a slightly lower price. I love my husband so much. He knew exactly what he was doing. Your husband, I love lamp. When I was buying my house, I took my boyfriend with me to the viewing, and Realtor was talking mostly to him and even ended up calling him with bids on a house. Yes, the house I purchased all on my own and is mine. I don't take myself too seriously and I'm not easy to upset or embarrass, so I didn't really care. I was riding high on a wave of winning a bidding war. This August I bought a new truck and took my boyfriend with. He is white and I am Mexican. We arrived at the dealership and I asked about the Explorer they had front and center. Salesman comes over and is asking a bunch of questions to my BF. He told him it's for me. I was ignored for the entire conversation. I got up and started looking at the truck. A Hispanic salesman comes and asks me if I need help. I was out of there within 1.5 hours, keys in hand. Found my BF with the other salesman. I looked at BF and said I bought the one I wanted. Manny G got me squared away. The look of utter disappointment and anger on the guy's face was worth it. My BF chuckled and said I told you she was the one buying. Manny, you were great. Oh man, the schadenfreude of this one is so good. Manny knew what was up and saw an easy sale. Just listen to the customer. I was buying a new sports car. My husband and I walk into the dealership and the sales guy walks up holding his hand out to shake my husband's hand and asks how he can help. Fine. No biggie. My husband says she's buying, not me. Sales guy glances at me and says to my husband, well, it's not just her decision. Right. We left and I bought my new sports car elsewhere. Freaking butthole. The dealership that I absolutely adore won my affection when they asked who the car was for. I said me. He not only turned his full attention to me, but offered my husband and toddler snacks and a TV in the lounge. The rest of the deal was done solely with me. We were buying a car for me, paying for the whole thing outright, but financing the minimum amount because they ran a deal that got $1,500 off if we financed through them. We paid the whole note the next month. So of course we had to sit in the salesman's office for an inordinately long amount of time answering questions. The salesman, who was great in every other way because he was a hands-off, no pressure guy, we walked from several other places when they attempted to pressure us, would ask my husband the questions. My husband pointed at me and said I don't know, it's her car. Salesman said of course, but we all know how it goes, right, and kept asking him. So what ended up happening? Because we both wanted to get the paperwork signed and get the heck out of there with the car, but we were also on the same wavelength wondering about how far we could go with this, was that the salesman would ask my husband the question. Husband would blatantly turn to me and repeat the question. I would answer him. Then he would turn back to the salesman and repeat exactly what I'd said. Dude never got the idea that maybe he could just ask me the questions. On the car we bought for my husband a few years later, since we put both our names on the paperwork we both had to sign, the finance guy saw my last name was different and asked when we were getting married, and was confused when we said 8 years ago. My wife and I are both physicians. She is very type A and particular. I am much more relaxed and I go with the flow. We recently had a new home built and since then have done a lot in regards to landscaping and adding to the home. Finishing the basement, adding on a standby generator. The thing is, despite my wife usually being the one to reach out to contractors, and despite the fact that she is the one who wants things done in a specific way, and despite the fact that I usually refer them to her, they always try to contact me first, talk primarily to me when we are both present, and reach out to me when they have questions or need to let us know things. It is bizarre, like, I am the dude in pajama pants and a sweatshirt playing The Floor is Lava with the kids. Does it look like I care what kind of finish is on the cabinets? Talk to the wife. We all know she is in charge. I mean, obviously you're not going to ask for design choices from the guy who installed lava floors with children in the house. Talk to the responsible adult. I'm the husband, but when we have any kind of work done on our house everyone constantly tries to make eye contact with me and pal around. My wife does all of that stuff. I don't know anything about any of it. I literally spend the whole time redirecting people to deal with her. Sometimes I just excuse myself and have her fill me in on details, which I don't care about or need to know later. My wife and I in Dubai. Being the Middle East, they would exclusively approach me, but the credit card was hers every damn time. Not me, but my mum. I'm not married anyway. My parents were looking to get solar panels and invited several people over to give their recommendations and get a quotation. This one salesperson kept only looking at my dad, only responding to his questions and not hers, and the quotation ended up being addressed only to my dad, not to the both of them. My mom stood her ground and said that even if his offer was the lowest, they would not be choosing him. My mom is very anti-confrontational, so I was really proud of her. Another time, I was helping my mom book plane tickets online for both my parents. Even though she filled her name in first, the online system suggested that my dad would be the main booker. My mom booked her tickets elsewhere. Not exactly the same, but still not awesome sexism. When we were having our house built, the lady helping us kept saying that the house would have Wi-Fi on all 3 floors, but we asked and paid extra to have Ethernet cables run to certain rooms. She laughed and said, well, he can have one run to his office, but you'll be fine with Wi-Fi, and I was like, no, I would like one as well. We both play games online, sometimes MMOs, and wanted hardlines run, and she just couldn't understand why a woman would need anything other than Wi-Fi. Just made me angry for her to make the assumptions. My husband is awesome and regularly tells contractors to speak to me about things. My dad was a machinist. My mom worked for a tool company. I've built bathrooms, put shingles on, repaired popcorn ceilings, built stairs, repaired dishwashers, sinks, washing machines, etc. Even things like spackle. He's like, maybe you should do this, you are better at it. He handles the car, I handle the house. Divide and conquer. It's so frustrating when people assume I don't know anything about repairs or tools. Heck, in high school I took AutoCAD. I'm just glad my husband is very supportive and thinks I am capable of doing things. So this one doesn't really involve any women, but a co-worker of mine, Indian contractor, had a high-pitched voice when speaking English. He was on the phone with his insurance to ask why they hadn't made the payment to the garage fixing his car, and you could tell he was getting angrier and angrier at them when I all of a sudden heard him yell, I am the husband. Apparently the guy on the other line, though it was a good move to tell my co-worker, can we talk with your husband about this, you don't seem to understand what we're saying. Our female co-workers were livid when they heard that and had a whole bunch of similar stories. Completely off topic, but I have noticed that a decent amount of bilingual people have different pitches in different languages. I have a chronic pain disease that runs in the family. I noticed that my father and male relatives had no problems securing pain meds, but that my doctors would never give me any, despite clearly indicating how much pain I was in. So I started bringing either my father or my husband to my medical appointments, which is hugely intrusive, would have them repeat how much pain I was in, and lo and behold, suddenly I get pain medication. When I had my appendix taken out, I asked my doctor when sex would be okay again. He turned to my husband and said, whenever you feel ready, you can begin sexual relations again. I don't know if he was uncomfortable talking to me about it, or was deferring to what my husband would prefer. Either way, it was strange. I've had a gynecologist speak only to my husband. I wanted to scream he doesn't have a vagina, but I was too shocked. During my architecture internship, we had this couple client that wanted to do some renovation. The paymaster was the wife, but my senior at that time kept referring to the husband about everything until one day the wife snapped because the husband changed her design and telling my senior that it was from her. He was trying to pocket some of the money for himself. Lesson learned: always include both sides if your client is a couple. I'm an army veteran. My debit card is with a military affiliated bank. Every time I pay for dinner at a restaurant, they bring it back, set it in front of my husband and say thank you for your service. My husband was never in the military. The card has my name on it, and sometimes they even watched me pull it out of my bag. I have also been by myself somewhere, paid for something with a card, and had the person see the card, look at me and say, oh, was your husband or dad in the military? No, they were not. I was. Thank you. To be very clear, I do not want or need to be thanked for my service. Trying to collect a parcel from the post office that was addressed to both me and my husband. Was told that my husband had to come to collect it. I asked whether they meant both of us had to be there, and the response was no, just him. Needless to say, I was not happy, and after a while arguing, they gave me the parcel. Not exactly this scenario, but it rankles me to this day. There was a particular car I wanted, and I wanted it with a manual transmission, which was tough to find in that car. There was one at a local dealer that was near my office, so I stopped in during my lunch hour to see what they'd do on price. At the time, I was a young, professional woman in my 20s. The car was for me and I was paying cash. I wander in around noon on a Tuesday. No one even acknowledges my presence, though there was no one else in the showroom. Finally, I go up to one of the salespeople and say, "Hey, do you still have model car? I thought you had one in stock." The guy looks at me in total seriousness and says in a very condescending tone, "Oh, honey, you don't want that car. It has a manual transmission. Let me show you these others that would be better for you." WTF. After the initial shock wore off, I looked at him and said, "Well, first off, my name isn't Honey. I have a name which you'd know if you'd bothered to ask. Second, I know what I want and don't need you to tell me. I think we're done here." And, with that, I walked out the door. I ended up finding the same model, manual transmission, at another dealership about an hour from my house. Totally worth the drive. I did most of the deal over the phone. The salesman DGAF that I was female. We got to a price we could both live with and the deal was done. So much better. Drove that car until it died about 10 years later. The first dealership went out of business about a year later. Can't say I'm surprised. Reminds me of a female friend of mine who wanted a manual Corvette, and they pulled the same crap on her, so she bought it from another dealership, then went back to the first just to show the crappy salesman he just missed out on a $60,000 plus sale. I have issues constantly when going out to eat with my boyfriend. They always put the bill down directly in front of him no matter what. Even when I reach across the table to grab it and put my card in, they almost always put the check back down in front of him after swiping the card. They will often turn to him and thank him or tell him to have a great evening or which copy to sign. It's infuriating. Not a spousal thing, but I work on male skewing TV shows, and a lot of my colleagues are male. It happens from time to time overall, but there is one really weirdly consistent instance. We hire local drone operators all over the US and around the world. I'm the showrunner and I direct the shows, so when we meet our drone team I give them an overview of what we're looking for in the shot. Conservatively, 75% of the time, follow-up questions will be directed to my male colleagues. No matter where we go, it happens. My colleagues are now in the habit of just staring back in response, letting it get real awkward, and then saying "ask her." Just staring back in response, letting it get real awkward, and then saying "ask her." I feel like this is the right response to most of the crap that I'm reading on here. They might be more likely to learn something if they remember how awkward it was the last time they screwed up. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.